Darren Sutter's night was already rough when he spotted the woman sitting alone on the park bench, heels in her hand, mascara smudged under her eyes, and a half-eaten cupcake beside her like it had personally betrayed her. He adjusted the strap of his daughter's pink backpack on his shoulder and motioned for little Ava to slow down. "Stick close, sweetheart, it's late." Ava skipped to the bench across from the woman and pointed. "Daddy, she looks sad." Darren glanced again. She did. Sad in a way that looked expensive, like she wasn't used to being sad in public. Her dress probably cost more than his entire monthly rent, and her earrings caught the streetlight like real diamonds. But she was alone, and something about that combined with the way her shoulders trembled made him pause. "Hey," he said gently, walking over with Ava tight by his side. "You okay, miss?" The woman looked up, startled. She blinked, then sniffled and gave a wobbly laugh. "I'm fine," she said, clearly lying. "Just bad date." "I get it," Darren said, nodding. "I've had a few of those. Well, not recently. I've been busy raising tornado number 1. He nudged Ava, who beamed. "I'm Ava," she said proudly. "Daddy says I'm like a hurricane, but with better hair." That actually made the woman laugh, a real one this time. "Nice to meet you, Ava. I'm Vivienne." Vivienne. She said it like she expected people to recognize it. Darren didn't. He offered a small smile. "Well, Vivienne, if it helps. This park has the best view of the city lights. You want company? We've got about 10 minutes before bedtime, and I've got one emergency granola bar left." Vivienne looked at him like he was speaking a different language. Then, slowly, she nodded. "Sure, why not?" They sat. Ava climbed onto Darren's lap, munching on the granola bar while Vivienne wiped the last of her tears away. "So," Darren said, "what did this guy do? Forget your name halfway through dessert." Vivienne gave a bitter smile. "Worse. He Googled my net worth before the appetizers came. Talked more about my family's business than anything else. Yikes. He offered to help me reinvest my assets." She used air quotes, rolling her eyes. "I left before dessert." Darren let out a low whistle. "Honestly, glad you did. Sounds like a jerk in a suit." Vivienne tilted her head. "You're not going to ask what business I'm in?" "Nope." "Why?" "Because I don't care," Darren said simply. "I mean, I care that you're upset, but I don't need to know your resume to know a guy was a tool." Vivienne blinked at him again. "That's refreshing." He smiled down at Ava, who was now curled against him, eyes fluttering. "We like to keep things simple." Vivienne looked at them, this man in a faded jacket, holding a sleeping little girl like she was his whole world, and something in her chest shifted, warmed. "Where's her mom?" she asked softly. Darren didn't flinch. "Left a year ago. Said she wasn't cut out for diapers and daycare. Guess she wanted something flashier." "I'm sorry," he shrugged. "It's okay. We're doing all right. I fix cars during the day and drive rideshare at night when I can. Ava's the best thing that ever happened to me. I don't need much more." Vivienne stared at him. The way he said that, so matter-of-fact, so full of love, it made her throat tighten. "I should go," she said after a beat, but her voice was reluctant. "Want a ride?" Darren offered. "I mean, I'm technically off duty, but I've got a booster seat in the back." She hesitated, then shook her head. "I'm close, just needed air." "All right." He stood, adjusting Ava in his arms. "Well, I hope your next date doesn't try to audit you at dinner." That made Vivienne laugh again. "Thank you, Darren, was it?" He nodded. She looked at him a moment longer. "Can I see you again?" His brows lifted. "You want to?" "I do." He looked down at Ava, then back at Vivienne. "Okay, sure. I mean, I'm not exactly dinner at the Ritz material, but I make a mean spaghetti." Vivienne smiled. "Spaghetti sounds perfect." He grinned. "Then spaghetti it is." They parted ways, and Darren didn't look back. He figured she'd forget about him by morning. Just a poor dad with a granola bar and a sleepy kid. But Vivienne didn't forget, not that night, not the next morning, and especially not when she looked up Darren Sutter on her phone and found nothing, no social media, no LinkedIn. Just a listing for a tiny auto shop in Queens and a 5-star review about his honesty and fair prices. She stared at her phone, stunned. For the first time in years, someone looked her in the eyes and didn't see dollar signs. And she wasn't ready to let that go. Not now, not ever. Vivienne stepped into the glass-wrapped elevator of her family's midtown skyscraper, the city swirling below her like a living painting. She barely registered the polite nods of the security staff or the subtle bows of assistants as she passed. Her mind was still back on that park bench. Not the date, not the man with the investment pitch and the champagne arrogance, but Darren. She'd met 1,000 men in tailored suits who knew her name before she introduced herself, but not one who offered a granola bar and didn't ask about her wealth. Not one who looked at her like she was just a person. The elevator doors opened to the penthouse suite that technically belonged to her father, but hadn't seen him in months. She'd grown up in this space, polished marble floors, museum-grade art, every surface curated to perfection. But she'd never felt more out of place in it. "Miss Vivienne," came a voice from the doorway. "You're back early." She turned to find Margaret, the housekeeper who'd been with the family since Vivienne was a teenager. Her gray bun was always tight, her expressions always knowing. "He tried to pitch me a business partnership before the starter course," Vivienne said, tossing her clutch on the console table. Margaret raised an eyebrow. "That's a new record, even for you." Vivienne sank onto the velvet couch and kicked off her heels. "I met someone after," Margaret blinked. "Do tell," in the park, he was with his daughter. Margaret's eyes narrowed slightly. "He approached you with a child in tow." "He wasn't like that," Vivienne said quickly. "He wasn't flirting, he was just kind." Margaret gave her a long, assessing look. "That's rarer than good caviar in this city." Vivienne stood. "He doesn't know who I am. I didn't tell him my last name." "Then he might be the only person in Manhattan who doesn't. I'm seeing him again." Margaret's brows lifted. "And what, exactly, do you plan to say when he asks what you do?" Vivienne hesitated. "I'll tell him, eventually." Margaret didn't argue, she just tilted her head. "Be careful, dear. The world he lives in, and the one you do, they don't overlap without friction." Vivienne nodded, but her mind was already on something else. 2 days later, she was standing outside a modest brick building in Queens, wearing jeans and a navy windbreaker that hadn't seen daylight in years. A sign above the door reads Sutter and Sons Auto. Though there was no Sons in sight, she hesitated, then pushed the door open. A bell chimed overhead. From behind the counter, Darren straightened, a streak of oil across his arm. His eyes lit up when he saw her. "You actually came. I said I would." He gestured to a stool near the counter. "Sorry for the mess. We just finished an engine rebuild. You want coffee? It's terrible, but it's hot." "I'll take it." He poured her a paper cup and slid it across. "I didn't expect you to find this place," he said. "Told you I wasn't exactly Manhattan material." "I like Queens," she said with a small smile. "It's honest." He leaned against the counter. "So what do you actually do, Vivienne?" She hesitated, then took a sip of the bitter coffee. "I'm in corporate management." She set the cup down. "A few things, real estate, holdings, it's complicated." He didn't press, just nodded. "Sounds important, it can be. But mostly it's a lot of people talking over each other in glass rooms." Darren chuckled. "That sounds about right. I fixed a guy's Bentley last week who kept calling his assistant Synergy. I thought it was her name until I realized he was talking about a sales report." Vivienne laughed, and it startled her how good it felt, like exhaling after holding your breath too long. Before she could say more, a small voice called from the back room. "Daddy," Darren turned. "In here, bug." Ava came running out, her curls bouncing, a half-eaten popsicle in one hand. "Hi, Vivienne," she chirped. "Daddy said you might come." Vivienne crouched. "Hi, Ava." "You remembered me." "You made Daddy smile," Ava said simply. "He doesn't do that with just anyone." Vivienne's throat tightened. "Well, I'm glad I did." Ava tugged on her sleeve. "Want to see my fort?" "Absolutely." Darren watched as Vivienne let Ava lead her into the back, stepping over tools and spare tires without complaint. He couldn't remember the last time a woman didn't flinch at the grease or look bored after 5 minutes. She stayed for hours. She helped Ava color paper crowns. She asked Darren questions about the business, not polite filler, but real ones. She wanted to know how he'd learned to rebuild transmissions, what it cost to run a shop like this, how long he'd owned it. And when he asked about her life, she gave just enough to keep him curious and just enough to not lie. By the time the sun dipped low and the streetlights flickered on, she stood to go. "I owe you dinner," she said, brushing a smudge of crayon from her sleeve. "You don't owe me anything. I want to." He wiped his hands on a towel. "All right, but only if I get to make dessert," she smiled. "Deal." As she walked out, Darren watched her go, something tightening in his chest. He didn't know much about her, not really. But whatever storm had brought her into his world, he wasn't ready to let her drift out of it just yet. And Vivienne, sliding into the back seat of her waiting car, stared out the window with a rare softness in her expression. She'd stepped out of his world for now. But she wasn't going to stay away for long. Darren tugged his jacket tighter as the wind picked up outside the diner. The place was small, just a corner joint with checkered floors, cracked leather booths, and a waitress named Cheryl who kept calling him Han. But it was the only spot he could think of that wasn't either a chain or trying too hard. Vivienne walked in, hair tousled by the wind, cheeks pink from the cold. She paused in the doorway, scanning the room. Her eyes landed on him, and when she smiled, something loosened in his chest. "You found it," he said, standing to pull out her chair. "I almost didn't," she said, sliding into the booth. "My driver looked like he was going to stage a protest." Darren laughed. "Yeah, this place doesn't exactly scream 5-star, but the pie's solid." She looked around. "It's perfect." Cheryl came by, poured them coffee, and handed them laminated menus. Vivienne opened hers like it was a museum artifact. "Do you always bring dates here?" she asked, eyes twinkling. "Only the ones who get crayons thrown at them by my kid," Darren said. "It's a selective group." Vivienne tapped a finger against the menu. "I'm honored." They ordered grilled cheese for her, double cheeseburger for him, and once Cheryl shuffled off, Vivienne leaned her elbow on the table. "So," she said. "Tell me something I don't know about you." Darren tilted his head. "Like what?" "Anything. Something you don't usually tell people right away," he considered. "Okay, when I was 16, I wanted to be a pilot. I even applied to a training program in Arizona. What happened? My dad totaled our only car. He broke his wrist, couldn't work. I dropped out of the program before it started and took a job at a body shop instead." Vivienne's fingers curled around her coffee mug. "Do you ever regret it?" "Sometimes," he admitted. "When Ava's asleep and the house is quiet, I think about what it would have been like, flying over cities I've never seen. But then I remember if I'd done that, I wouldn't have Ava. And honestly, nothing beats being her dad." Vivienne looked down at her cup. "You're good at it, I can tell," he shrugged. "I try, she deserves it." She opened her mouth, then hesitated. "My mother left when I was 8. She ran off with a man she met at a charity gala in Paris. My father never talked about it. Just replaced her with a new assistant every 6 months and told me to focus on being exceptional." Darren's eyes met hers. "That sounds lonely." It was. She traced the edge of her napkin. "Still is sometimes. I have friends, colleagues, but I don't think anyone really sees me." "Not without the last name." He leaned forward. "I do." The air between them shifted, quiet and heavy. Their food arrived, breaking the moment, but the weight of his words lingered. They ate slowly, conversation drifting to music, childhood crushes, the way Ava had declared war on peas last week. Vivienne told him about a disastrous attempt at horseback riding in Colorado, how she ended up in a thorn bush and still has scars on her ankle. After dinner, they walked out together. Her driver stood discreetly at the curb, but she didn't move toward the car. "Do you want to see something?" she asked. "Sure." She led him down 2 blocks, stopped in front of a small storefront with shuttered windows and a faded awning. The sign above read Evergreen Books, the letters chipped and nearly unreadable. "My grandmother used to bring me here every Sunday," she said. "It closed years ago, but I still come sometimes, just to remember what it felt like to not be surrounded by people expecting something from me." Darren looked at her, then at the building. "You ever think about buying it?" "Bringing it back," she laughed softly. "I could. I just never knew if I'd be doing it for me or to prove something to my father." He nodded. "Then maybe do it for your grandmother." She turned to him, her breath visible in the crisp air. "Why do you always say the right thing?" "I don't," he replied. "I just say what I mean." Vivienne stepped closer, the space between them narrowing. "I haven't told you everything. You don't have to, but I want to." She hesitated again, then looked up at him. "My last name is Wexley." Darren blinked. "As in, Wexley Holdings," she nodded. "That's me," he exhaled slowly. "Wow. I didn't want to lie, but I didn't want you to treat me differently either." "I get it, do you?" He met her eyes. "I don't care how many zeros are in your bank account. I care that you sat on a curb and shared a granola bar with my kid. I care that you laugh at my terrible jokes and don't flinch when things get messy." She looked away, her voice barely above a whisper. "Most people only see the money. I see you." She looked back, and this time she didn't hesitate. She stepped forward, pressed her lips to his, soft and uncertain at first, then firmer, as if anchoring herself to something real. When they pulled apart, Darren rested his forehead against hers. "You sure you're ready for this? It won't be easy." Vivienne smiled, eyes shining with something new. "I've never been more sure of anything." They didn't speak again as her driver opened the door. She slid into the back seat, but her hand lingered outside until Darren took it and gave it a squeeze. As the car pulled away, he stood on the sidewalk, watching the taillights disappear into the city night. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring. But for the first time in years, it felt like something extraordinary was just beginning. Vivienne stepped out of the black car onto the cracked sidewalk, her heels clicking against the uneven concrete. The wind tugged at the collar of her coat as she approached the modest brownstone. Light spilled from the top floor window, warm and golden against the twilight. She pressed the intercom button and waited. A moment later, Darren's voice crackled through. "Hang on." The buzzer buzzed and she pushed the door open. Inside, the stairwell smelled faintly of old wood and laundry detergent. She climbed the narrow steps 2 at a time, heart thrumming with something that felt dangerously close to hope. When Darren opened the door, he was holding a dish towel in one hand and had flour dusted across his forearm. "You're early," he said. "I couldn't sit in another meeting pretending to care about quarterly returns," she replied, stepping inside. The apartment was small but clean. A string of painted paper hearts hung across the window. A faint scent of cinnamon filled the air. "Ava's in the bath," he said. "She insisted on using the strawberry bubbles tonight, so the place smells like dessert." Vivienne took off her coat and hung it by the door. "What are you baking?" "Cinnamon rolls, from scratch." "I figured if you were going to meet the chaos that is bedtime, you deserved a reward." She followed him into the kitchen, her eyes sweeping over the mismatched mugs, the stack of children's books on the counter, the drawing taped to the fridge that read "My Family" in uneven crayon letters. Her chest tightened at the sight of her own figure drawn beside Darren and Ava, complete with a crooked yellow crown. "You let her draw me?" she asked quietly. "She insisted," he said, dusting his hands. "Said she needed to make room for the lady who makes Daddy's eyes look shiny." Vivienne blinked fast. "She's observant. She's relentless," he corrected with a grin. "But yeah, she's got a good read on people." He turned to her more serious now. "You sure about this? I didn't grow up in a house like this," she said, voice softer. "We had chandeliers, staff, and a dining table no one ever sat at. But this," she looked around, "this feels more real than anything I've known." She stepped closer, her voice lowering. "I don't want to keep pretending I belong in that world, not if it means I have to leave this one behind." Darren studied her. "You're not pretending anymore." A crash sounded from the bathroom, followed by a high-pitched laugh and the unmistakable sound of water sloshing over the edge of a tub. "I should check that," Darren said, already moving. She followed him to the doorway, watching as he knelt beside the tub. Ava sat in a froth of pink bubbles, hair slicked back and face gleaming with mischief. "I made a wave," Ava declared proudly. "You made a flood," Darren said, grabbing a towel. "Let's keep the Atlantic Ocean in the tub next time, okay?" Vivienne knelt beside him. "I didn't know bathing could be this dramatic." Ava grinned at her. "Daddy said you're coming to the school thing tomorrow." Vivienne glanced at Darren. "I told her you might," he said. "She's doing a poem about family." Ava splashed again. "I wrote it myself, but I need someone to clap really loud when I'm done." Vivienne smiled. "I can do that." Later, once Ava was asleep and the cinnamon rolls were cooling on the counter, Darren handed her a blanket and they sat on the small balcony, knees touching, the city buzzing faintly below. "She's really happy," Vivienne said. "I try to keep it that way." "You do more than try," he looked over at her. "You know, when I first saw you on that bench, I thought you were out of a magazine. I never imagined you'd be here, eating cinnamon rolls on my fire escape." She leaned her head against his shoulder. "Neither did I," he hesitated. "There's something I want to say." She turned to him. "I know your world is big, bigger than mine, and I'm not pretending I have anything close to what you're used to, But I love you, Vivienne. I love the way you read Ava bedtime stories with voices. I love that you don't flinch when life gets messy. I love that you see people, not just titles," her breath caught. "Darren, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I just needed you to know." She reached for his hand. "I know what it feels like to be wanted for the wrong reasons. But with you, I finally feel like myself." She pulled something from her coat pocket, an envelope. She held it out. "What's this?" "It's a deed," she said. "To the bookstore I showed you. I bought it last week. I'm reopening it, not as a business strategy, not for my father, for me. For my grandmother, for the little girl who used to dream between the shelves." He turned the envelope over in his hands. "You're really doing it. I want you to design the reading nook," she said, "with Ava however you want." He looked at her, stunned. "You're sure?" "I've never been more sure of anything." He kissed her then, slow and certain, under the soft hum of the city lights. 3 weeks later, the bookstore opened with hand-painted signs, mismatched chairs, and a crayon mural on the back wall that read, "Stories begin here." Vivienne cut the ribbon while Ava held the scissors with both hands. Darren stood beside them, his arm wrapped tight around Vivienne's waist. The mayor attended. So did half the neighborhood. But Vivienne only noticed the man who'd once handed her a granola bar and asked for nothing in return. Later that night, after the last guest had gone, Darren locked the door, turned to her and said, "You ready for the next chapter?" She smiled. "Only if you're in it." And he was. Always. Vivienne stood in front of the mirror, adjusting the collar of a light blue cardigan as sunlight poured into the back room of the bookstore. The place had transformed in just a few short weeks, shelves now lined with hand-picked titles, a corner filled with beanbags, and a tiny stage for children's readings, and a coffee bar tucked against the far wall where the scent of fresh espresso wafted through the air. She stepped out into the main floor, surveying the quiet bustle of customers, from college students flipping through poetry to elderly couples thumbing through historical biographies. It was exactly what she hoped it would be, a place that felt like home to everyone. Darren was crouched near the front window, helping Ava arrange a display of picture books. She was wearing a yellow apron 3 sizes too big with her name painted in glitter across the front. Darren glanced up, catching Vivienne's eye. The look they shared was brief, but full of something unspoken and deep. "I told her the dragons should go on the top shelf," Ava said, frowning at the stack of books in her arms. "But he thinks bunnies are better sellers." "Bunnies outsold dragons last week," Darren said. "It's data-driven marketing," Vivienne laughed. "Let's compromise. Bunnies on the middle shelf, dragons up top. Sound fair?" Ava considered, then nodded. "Only if the dragons get the sparkly sign." "Deal," Vivienne said, kneeling beside them. As the 3 of them worked in quiet coordination, the door swung open and a tall man in a tailored suit stepped inside. His slicked back hair and polished shoes made him look out of place among the worn wood and cozy chaos. Vivienne stood slowly. "Marcus," her father's expression was unreadable as he approached. "You've been hard to reach." "I've been busy," she said calmly. He took in the shelves, the mismatched furniture, the bulletin board filled with local event flyers. "So this is what you've given it all up for?" "I haven't given up anything," she replied. "I've finally chosen something." He glanced at Darren, who stood unflinching beside Ava. "And him, you trust this arrangement?" Vivienne stepped forward, chin high. "I trust myself." "And I trust him." Marcus's lips thinned. "You're walking away from a legacy, Vivienne." "No," she said, "I'm building my own." There was a long pause before Marcus's gaze shifted to Ava. The little girl stared back, unblinking. "She's very bright," he said finally. "She is." Another silence stretched between them, then he nodded once, almost imperceptibly. "If this is what you want, I hope it gives you peace." She didn't reply. When the door closed behind him, Darren stepped beside her. "That felt like a battle," he said. "It was." She reached for his hand. "But I didn't lose." That evening, as the last customer left and the lights dimmed to a golden glow, Darren pulled Vivienne into the reading corner. Ava was sprawled on a beanbag with a stack of books, humming softly to herself. "I was thinking," Darren said, brushing a strand of hair from Vivienne's cheek, "about the bookstore, about us." She tilted her head. "What about us?" "I never thought I'd have this again," he said. "Something real." Something that feels like a beginning and not just a survival tactic. Vivienne leaned into him. You've given me more than you know. You showed me what it means to be chosen, not evaluated. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. Her breath caught. I don't have a yacht, he said quietly, or a villa in Tuscany, but I have this life, this bookstore, Ava, me, and I want you in it, not as a visitor, not for weekends, for good. She opened the box. Inside was a delicate ring, a small sapphire surrounded by tiny diamonds, understated, beautiful. Real, yes, she whispered before he could even ask the question. Yes, Darren. 1,000 times yes. He slipped the ring onto her finger, and when they kissed, Ava squealed from across the room and threw a handful of confetti she'd been saving for emergencies. They laughed, holding each other, confetti in their hair, the scent of cinnamon and old pages in the air. Months passed. The bookstore became a neighborhood staple. Vivienne started hosting weekly author nights and opened a scholarship fund for young writers. Darren expanded the back room into a repair nook, teaching weekend workshops for teens interested in mechanics. Ava insisted on naming it Fix-It Fortress, and no one argued. They married in the garden behind the bookstore, under a canopy of string lights and paper lanterns. The guest list was small close friends, a few loyal customers, and Margaret, who cried through the entire ceremony and wore a flower crown Ava made herself. Vivienne wore a simple silk dress, her hair down, her eyes never leaving Darren's. He held her hand like it was the most natural thing in the world. After the vows, after the cake and laughter and dancing, they sat together on the back steps, shoes off, fingers interlaced. Do you ever miss it? Darren asked. The skyscrapers, the meetings. The power, she rested her head on his shoulder. No, not once. Good, he said, because I was never letting you go back. You never had to worry. Ava came running out, clutching a basket of leftover petals. Can we have cake for breakfast tomorrow? Vivienne looked at Darren. Can we? He smiled. You're the boss. No, she said, pulling him close. We're the bosses, all three of us. They sat there long after the music faded, the stars above and a future ahead that felt exactly right, and they never looked back.